Imagine there is a certain item in World of Warcraft that quite literally everyone wants, but only players with a certain profession are able to gather, and even then it's impossibly rare. An item which is used in consumables that are disproportionately powerful and required if you really want to push performance in raiding. Well, back in classic WoW there was such an item, and it was called the Black Lotus. Black Lotus were part of a number of important profession items too, such as the Gorobashi Mojo Madness. You needed this to spawn the extra boss in Zul'Gurub for the class trinkets, or the stealth enchant on cloaks, so rogues could be that little extra bit annoying, but their main use were for flasks. Speaking of flasks and consumables though, I want to do a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Factor 75. January is the most popular time to set health and fitness goals, and Factor 75 can help you achieve these by supplying healthy, dietitian-approved meals which are calorie counted. A real bonus is that because you can order ahead of time, you'll always have hassle-free food which is ready in 2 minutes or less. No expensive takeouts, no fuss, no cleanup. Keep focused on the things which are important to you. All you do is heat, eat, and recycle. And Factor 75 being delivered directly to your doorstep with their special packaging means you don't even need to be at home to receive them. Factor 75 has 30 plus new restaurant quality meals on each week's menu, as well as keto, calorie smart, vegan, and vegetarian options. You'll also get a free 20-minute nutrition coaching session, so why not give it a try? Use my link or go to factor75.com and use code POGWILLEJAN60 for 60% off your first box. Many thanks to Factor 75 for the continued support on the channel. Let's get back to WoW. Now in, to be honest, every expansion since Classic, flasks have not been too much of a problem. They're not going to cost you the majority of your gold to get 1 or 2 of them, and there's a number of reasons why this happened. Top of the list is that the ingredients became significantly easier to obtain. You needed a lot less of them, as well as profession specializations allowing for extra crafts. None of this was the case in vanilla. Flasking in vanilla was a commitment, and it kind of had to be because these flasks were A, really hard to make, and B, really overpowered. Take Flask of Supreme Power for an example, as it was in vanilla, a 2-hour buff that gives 150 spell power. Now in TBC, Blizzard realized, these vanilla flasks are kind of really good, so they nerfed Supreme Power down from 150 spell power to 70. Then the new flasks in TBC, such as Flask of Pure Death, gave 80 spell power, and then Wrath came around where Flask of the Frostworm gives 125 spell power. So if we're comparing the unchanged version of each flask between each expansion, the vanilla flask that we were using at level 60 is 25 spell damage more powerful than the one that we're currently using at level 80. And in starter raid gear, a flask could legitimately contribute to about 30% or more of your total spell damage. And of course they lasted through death as well, no other consumable did this. It's a pretty similar story for all the other flasks, for all the other roles as well in vanilla. So yeah, what I'm saying is these things are pretty overpowered. On top of that, you had to go to a special crafting table too in order to actually make them. It wasn't like it was in TBC where you had an alchemy table in Shattrath that was easy to get to, or Wrath where you can just make them anywhere. In Phase 1 of Classic, the only place in the game you could make flasks was Scholomance, not something a solo player could just hop in and do either. In Phase 2, there was an alchemy table added to Blackwing Lair just after Broodlord Lashalayer. It was even placed you could go and craft flasks whilst waiting for the flame buffet stacks to drop on the Firemaw encounter. Pretty convenient that you could do that. But the biggest hurdle was assembling the items. Flasks simply needed a huge amount of ingredients per one, each one requiring some 40 or so endgame herbs. Flask of the Titans, for example, that's the one that gave bonus health, needed 30 Grom's blood, these are gathered from high level zones or dungeons, 10 stone scale oil, these were from fishing, and 1 Black Lotus. In fact, every flask needed a Black Lotus, so how do we get them? Well, step 1 is going to be going out there and grinding up to 300 herbalism. Only herbalists with a max skill could even pick these in the first place. And it's classic of course, so gathering attempts can fail. You could actually have clicked a Black Lotus herb, failed the attempt, and then somebody else comes along at the right time, clicks it before you do, and takes it under your nose. One of Classic's more rage-inducing moments, that's for sure. Though if I remember right, Tauren's plus 15 racial bonus to herbalism puts them over the failure threshold, so Tauren's OP I guess. Black Lotus could be found in 4 high-level zones, those being Winterspring, Silithus, the Burning Steppes, and the Eastern Plaguelands. Also back in vanilla, they were their own gathering nodes. Lotus were not rare finds from other herbs, as Fel Lotus worked in TBC or Frost Lotus in Wrath. And when I say they were rare, I mean it. Unless you were properly setting in for a several-hour-long herbalism session, the chance you came across one in the wild was incredibly low. The one time I saw a Black Lotus in literally the whole of Classic was having it spawn as we were running as a guild to Molten Core, and of course somebody instantly grabbed it. The reason why they're so rare is because only one could spawn at a time in those 4 aforementioned zones, and on top of that there were a good 24 or so spawn points in each of the zones. On top of that, they had around a 1 hour respawn time each. Now in original vanilla, sure, Black Lotus were hard to get, but the concept of full consumes for raiding was just nowhere near as commonplace as it was when we did Classic. Whether it was lack of knowledge of what consumables stack, things working differently as they have progressive patches, or just the cost of flasking up, it was less of a thing. The top-end server capacity was much lower too. The player base was simply spread out across a greater number of servers. Blizzard posts from pre-Classic launch in 2019 say as much as well. Please also note that our realm population estimates of low, medium, high, and full are based on this increased capacity. A medium realm today already has more characters on it than even the most crowded realms did back in 2006. And its estimated vanilla servers capped out around 4,000 to 5,000 players, whereas in Classic the big servers were easily over 10k. That's a whole lot more people in one place. Add on top of this the fact that nowadays people min-max the game a lot more. They want to play the top DPS with Abyss gear and turn up for raids with the correct enchants, food, and of course consumables, including flasks. Sure, the content was easy back then, which is why people turned to competing for speed clears or for passing, and you didn't want to be the one guy who didn't turn up with flasks when everybody else did. That just wasn't a good look for you. But what happens when we put easily 3 to 4 times the player capacity onto vanilla realms alongside a player base that is much more predisposed to min-maxing? The demand for flasks, and therefore Black Lotus, absolutely skyrockets to unreasonably high levels. Keep in mind there's 4 Lotus spawning across 4 zones per hour. That's 96 Lotus per day per realm, which isn't even enough for 3 40-man raid teams to flask up. The big servers had thousands of people trying to raid on reset days, with data from sites such as Ironforge.pro showing easily above 250,000 active raiders on most weeks during Classic. This made Black Lotus into the hottest commodity in Classic WoW by a very long way. Players who leveled early could solo farm and reap the rewards of their no-lifing, whilst the price of this virtual herb started to gain significant interest from not so legitimate methods of farming, as well as those looking to profit in the real world. And if Black Lotus were one thing, it was profitable. So to put things in perspective back then, gold was worth a lot more. These were fresh servers after all, there weren't daily quests, raw gold farms weren't as good, and only one class, the mage, could really access the best farming methods. I'd say that 1 gold back then in Classic is worth at least 10 now in Wrath. And I've got plenty of clips on the channel from back in the day between phases 1 and 2, a Black Lotus going for in excess of 200 gold, and the flasks themselves being near 230g or even more. Of course, things varied a lot here on where you played. I was on Gehennas at the time, which was a giga sweaty server, and therefore a giga expensive server. Other places had literally half the price, as you can see here. Imagine with 10 times inflation if your flasks for Nax 25 will cost you over 2,000 gold each. That's a pretty real way to think about how much these things were back then. And that's just for your flask, by the way. Nearly every consumable stack, because, you know, it's vanilla, remember? You could legit have about 24 different consumes for different occasions. Suffice to say, if you wanted to flask, you had to get out there and grind gold hard, or go farm them yourself. Neither option was without its own challenges. Early in Classic, for example, as a warlock, I went and farmed Eye of Shadow in Dark Whisper Gorge. It was a 1 in 100 drop chance and needed for priests to craft their benediction. You could get a few 200 gold for each of these drops. Later, after Diamond Ore came out, I did Diamond Ore East jump runs, mining the rich thorium veins at the end. They had a chance to drop an arcane crystal, which went for somewhere around 60 to 100 gold. Again, each server varied a lot here. But as a warlock, I had good options for farming. Other classes, as in everyone apart from mage to be honest, did not have things this good. Now you could always duo farm with somebody else, that was always a solid option, but then you need somebody else to be on, you have to split the gold, it can be inconvenient and so on and so forth, and people wanted to keep up, people wanted to flask, but actually going out there and farming in the open world was incredibly competitive for reasons we've already gone over, and as time went on, many people got tired with farming and looked to other sources to source their consumables. Early on in Classic, the black market for Black Lotus was booming. These are screenshots from April 2020, where one of these virtual herbs would set you back some $10, meaning a stack of Black Lotus had a pretty realistic real-world value of $200. The supply could barely match the demand, and do these prices ever show it? It's mad to me that people were willing to fork out this level of money for these items, but hey, you know what they say, time is money, friend. The relaunch of World of Warcraft had proven an extremely lucrative opportunity for gold farmers and botters, and they were fully dedicated to cornering off this market and driving prices as high as possible. If you controlled the majority of the daily 96 Lotus spawns on your realm, you could even hold stock back and create further demand for this item, and that is exactly what happened. How'd they do it? Well, there were a number of ways. First of all was establishing all these spawn locations. Thanks to the likes of add-ons, WoW heads, other server data, this was pretty fast to do. But then you have the problem of knowing where has the Lotus spawned. How can you know this without running laps of the zone and wasting a load of time? Pretty simple actually. The farmers would watch all of their Lotus spawns at the same time. Every single one. They would have level 1 characters come over to the spawns via summoning and have them die there. Then you have a ghost character watching the spawn all the time. If it spawns at that location, the herber for the zone comes along to pick it, and then you begin a timer with a pretty good idea of when to log in and next check that zone. A lot of herb mafias would come about because of this too, and on PvP servers, farmers would nearly always be able to outnumber a single player at any time of the day. I know some guilds that did this too as a bit of fun way to encourage some more PvP, and it was just a good gold farm as well. But for the average player who got on in the evening and had a couple hours to play, you were gonna seriously struggle to farm in the open world, let alone actually being able to see a single Black Lotus. It wasn't until May 2020 that Blizzard finally took action, and back then, them actually changing things was a pretty serious step. The whole no changes idea was still very strong, so for Blizzard to actively be rebalancing something in game was a big deal. This change, however, was pretty much unanimously seen as something that would overwhelmingly benefit the majority of players. They say, since the launch of WoW Classic, the game has used the spawn times and locations from original World of Warcraft, but populations and social factors have led to Black Lotus being much more scarce than it was in original WoW. We're going to increase the spawn rate of Black Lotus, and we're going to add many additional spawn locations in each of the Black Lotus zones. With a different hotfix, we're working on making it so a player cannot see a Black Lotus on screen or on their minimap if they're dead, unless they have 300 herbalism. This one fell swoop of a change hit all the points that it needed to. Gold farmers couldn't camp level 1 corpses on spawn points anymore, and the availability of Black Lotus went up around 4 times or so. Player estimates following the update reckon that Lotus spawn timers went as low as 15 minutes, down from 1 hour, and there was now multiple different spawn timers per zone and a load more spawn locations. Though gold farmers still went after Lotus, there were just so many more now, casual players had a realistic chance to get them, and the prices on the auction house started to come down. I have some footage showing the massive rise in quantity on the auction house alongside a huge price drop just after this change was made across both EU and NA. There was definitely a knee-jerk reaction to this change, mainly because people were drip selling Lotus on the auction house and wanted to offload in case they crashed, but prices settled to more reasonable amounts, though flasks were still around the 80 to 100 gold mark. It was a lot more attainable than they were going to be if they kept going up. In the Burning Crusade and Wrath, of course, the Lotus of the expansion are just rare drops from high-level herbs, and even in Season of Mastery, Blizzard made this change so Black Lotus would drop from high-level herbs too. Maybe that was just the sensible solution the whole time. But that's the story of the Black Lotus in Classic, and I don't think there's been something quite like it since. Maybe Darkmoon card greatness, that's kind of expensive to get early on in Wrath, but it's a one-time thing. You certainly aren't out there grinding gold weekly just to be able to raid anymore, that's for sure. It's one of the many things that made Classic an experience which is apart from other versions of World of Warcraft, and a special one at that. Anyways, let me know your Lotus experience from Classic, whether you are out there grinding or just trying to piece together your gold for this week's raid. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.